Good afternoon. Some more. Good afternoon. Okay, we have a half-filled room, so I would just request everybody to sit so that we can quickly start with this now. So we had a fascinating discussion before this on storytelling versus story selling. I think what we will now speak and discuss as a panel is another very interesting aspect. I think it obviously involves storytelling at one level, but it goes far beyond that, which is this entire business of of having multiple conversations, multiple marketing approaches with multiple consumers. So multi-channel marketing, how does that work? Purely from the point of view of having connected conversations, which can drive connected engagements, which eventually drive connected commerce, right? Very interesting panelist, people who are practitioners on the brand side, and people who are developing some fantastic tools and technologies to take us forward. But just to set the context of the entire discussion, a couple of slides so that we know what kind of discussions, what kind of areas we will be talking about. One, of course, is the first slide, which is a very general kind of a slide which tells you about this entire digital explosion that everybody is more or less familiar with, right? Various agencies, various slide formats, but the data more or less is something that is appreciated by everyone, which is just the sheer penetration of mobile subscribers, internet users, smartphones, and how that's being taken forward by social media, right, at the global stage. Massive, massive explosion that we are familiar with, right? The interesting part for me, and I'm sure is again something that all of us know, but to drive attention to that small chart on the other side, the end of the slide, as it were, right? That small column there, which says that 600 million internet users today, 900 by, and that's the Indian context, 900 by 2023, 180 out of 600 consuming video as a form of their lead content consumption on internet, and that 180 is going to rise to almost 650, with video being the lead driver of consumption of the internet. And interestingly, but not surprisingly, 750 million is going to consume this entire internet phenomenon through mobile devices, right? So huge implications on storytelling, huge implications on one key aspect of multi-channel marketing, which is the entire approach using video and digital and technology. And obviously something for us to always keep in mind in terms of across all our communication approaches, how mobile friendly, how mobile first are we when we put out anything at all in this ecosystem that we work with. The second slide, which is just a broad contour of therefore what can some of these ideas, thoughts lead to in terms of discussion places, right? So some of the things that we will try and touch upon today as discussion areas are how best are consumers connected, because consumers can be connected online, offline, through a mix of various platforms that we use, physical stores versus everything that happens in the online ecosystem. So how best are consumers connected from an omni point of view, from a real time, from a personalization point of view, from the point of view of video and the impact of that on linear tubing versus non-linear tubing. What is the impact of that on VTRs, for example? Very interesting panelist will speak a significant amount on that particular aspect, because I think there's some really breakthrough work that's happening on that particular front. How do these conversations also dovetail with consumers depending on which parts of their buying journeys they are currently in? Basis what kind of lifetime value that the consumer is going to be to the organization or to the brand. Importantly, whenever you're doing all these communications, especially in a multi-channel kind of format, what is the role, what is the importance of the consistency of the message? Every platform has its own way of disseminating communication, of engagement, right? But the brand speak, the brand thought, what you want to leave behind with the consumer, that consistency, how do you ensure that happens across all channels that you're communicating with? And importantly also, how does that consistency of message communicate in case of physical retail? I, for example, represent Fab India. We have 300 stores, 100 cities. It's very important for us to be very clear about the kind of experience that we want to talk about online. How does that translate actually to a consumer when he goes into a physical store? And so forth for a lot of other people here as well. Kaushik, for example, works with Ford. And the kind of work that Kaushik would do on Ford on digital platforms, how does that translate at a dealership level? So touch upon some of those issues. Uh, Another interesting aspect is that with this entire thing about AI and ML, and quite honestly, I don't know where the fine line of AI stops and ML starts. You know, I've had this multiple conversations. These interesting concepts. Where does AI start and where does ML stop? Or AI stop and ML start? But in the context of AI and ML, and with our ability to target messages, uh, how do we juxtapose that with the entire core essence of behavioral change communication? So there is one part of communication that gets developed basis all the inputs that you get from machine learning. But there is still a certain degree of human ingenuity that will be required to craft communication pieces that actually work. So how does this human creative ingenuity work in conjunction with AI and ML is another aspect that we'll try and briefly touch upon. And finally, is there a way of looking at multi-channel attribution? What is our perspective on ROI? How do we figure out the session before us, for example, was talking about storytelling, story selling, and one important question that came up there was, you know, we are the villains of the piece because even on things that are meant to actually drive engagement, the objective is to see conversions or to wrongly attribute certain metrics to it. So therefore, in this entire multi-channel approach, what is the role of various measurement matrices and how do we want to define ROI? Something that I spoke earlier, connected experiences in terms of communication that's happening in the online ecosystem, as well as the offline, online, offline, the experiences need to be consistent. And finally, how does this entire overlay of technology be with the human side of who we are? Right? There's this entire conversation that happens of, you know, technology will take away jobs and a lot of people are going to, you know, get unemployed. It's far from it actually. You know, technology enables us to do a lot of things, but there is still the human creativity, intellect, ingenuity required to carry through most of those conversations. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the broad outlay of what we plan to discuss today. We'll start over directly from our discussion now. And I'll probably start with Prashant actually to take the lead on this and talk about the role of technology in connecting consumers as a overall opening statement.
Right. Thanks, Karan. So, interestingly, even before we go into the role of technology, probably I'll touch upon in terms of what is connected communication from our perspective, right? As far as audiences are concerned, I'm saying audiences because when brand communicates with people, they can be your end customers, they can be your prospective customer, previous customer. So, for a better word, I'm using the word audience. Now, what does audience need or require? The first thing is recognition, right? Are we as a brand able to recognize the people whom we are communicating with at an individual level, right? At a personalized level. With the omni-channel being the norm and multiple devices being the norm, it is easier said than done, right? Second is, I mean, how real time we are in terms of our communication, right? When I say real time, depending on the location, depending on the time, depending on the day, so on and so forth. How many times we have been able to communicate, do a relevant communication to our audience, right? For example, I'm in a mall on a weekend, it's lunchtime. Does it make sense for a brand to push a notification to me with a dining offer, right? Third is how contextual we are, right? When we recognize our audiences, how contextual we are in terms of approaching them, right? Coming to the point in terms of how technology can make a lot of sense into it is, as some of our previous panelists were talking about the data, right? Now, when it comes to data, it's not only the data which is in structured format, which is there available in different data sources within a brand or within an organization. It's also the unstructured data which is there and in terms of what audiences are talking about you as a brand, say in social media. Now, combining these two data points, are you able to create a single view of a customer? Are you able to create a customer information hub as a solution provider. That is something which is very key. Once you are able to do that, the second thing which I would look at from a technology perspective is, are the insights relevant, right? When I say insights, depending, as we have just discussed, right, are we pushing in the right offer at the right time, anticipating or understanding the intent, right? Not only the interest, correct? And the third and last point is, I would say, as a technology provider, we need to make sure, can we do a conversion attribution? Right from the first point of click in terms of the interest which is generated on any of the digital or offline assets of a brand, are we able to completely map the entire journey, wherein the decision makers who are looking at that kind of information are able to draw inferences that what is working and what is not working, right? That's the kind, I think that's what technology has to play as far as connected communication is concerned.
That's brilliant. No, that's brilliant. I think it's a great opening statement and a very comprehensive one as well. I think one of the things that I picked up from there was the entire role of being able to collect data, put it into a mega structure, a mega architecture,
Yes.
and to be able to use that to turn out insights which could be used to contextually market, products and services. I'll just move to Kazad. Kazad, you're in the interesting business of insurance, and for you, I think this would be an extremely important, extremely important tool to create communication which A is personalized, B is contextualized, and C is relevant to individual consumer sets, or for that matter, even individual consumer life stages. How do you do this in your organization?
See, actually, I feel quite happy about the fact that I am the only panelist in this, stellar lineup, which is not a marketer. I actually consume everything that a marketer and a technology guy gives me. And, there is a hapless guy called a customer at the end of it all who, is trying to figure out what he did, what he got into for 20 years. So if you really think about it, insurance as an industry is, the easiest way to lose family and friends. You say you work in insurance, people kind of start abandoning you and walk away. They kind of unfriend you on Facebook, etc. So it's a very interesting business to the extent that it is long term. And typically, the previous panel actually gave me a lot of inspiration because they talked about storytelling. It's all about storytelling because somebody is telling you about what's going to happen to you 20 years from today. So he's like a soothsayer for all practical purposes. And the most important thing is that the guy who's going to be 20 years hence from today, which is you, really doesn't know whether he's going to be alive 20 years later. So is he really, buying into a proposition that's going to last him for the period? So insurance typically is the most expensive piece of paper you'll ever buy because all you bought is a promise. Okay? So keeping that in mind, the previous session, which was the Boundless Bharat session, talked about three very important attributes, and I think they are so relevant and contextual to this industry, which is A, is your communication authentic? Are you really selling a promise with the ability to actually fulfill it when the moment of truth actually arrives? B, very clearly, the only real communication insurance companies have with customers is please pay your premium. There isn't really anything more than that. You can't really discount. You can't really, solicit. You can't really rebate. So you really have nothing to offer the customer other than a promise. So B, can you keep your communication ephemeral because eventually this is a low mind share product and you don't really want to bombard the customer with too much content. And finally, absolutely right, is it contextual? Because one must understand that the guy who bought the policy today is not the same guy tomorrow. I mean, I may be young and single today, I may be married and, with a child tomorrow. And therefore, honestly speaking, the communication needs to be contextual. As a service provider, I need to know who you are 1 year later, 5 years later, 10 years later. So how much in touch are you with the customer? And how are you using technology to bring that customer closer to you? Because typically a customer who's sold by an agent typically may have researched the product online, but he may have bought offline. But typically insurance agents are much like the Bofors deal. Bofors was actually sold as a shoot and scoot mechanism. They are much like that. They'll sell you and then they don't know you. They don't take your calls. So how do you really bring technology to the customer as a manufacturer so he knows what is happening through his life cycle. So these are the real challenges that we face.
So, from your the point of view of your business, I'm sure there's a whole lot of engagement that happens with consumers on in the digital space.
It does, and it is interesting that Bajaj Allianz as a brand, typically, and while I don't really take pride in saying it, was known as the LIC of the private sector till a few years ago, and everything that we did was oriented towards calling a customer to a branch, which was honestly speaking quite a hellish experience. So the first thing we did, and we've actually introduced various technology interventions. So we have a chatbot which today has 350,000 people using it on a regular basis, exchange some 12 crore messages across 5 languages. So that's the kind of technology people are consuming in the C and D and E class towns of this country. So honestly speaking, people who say that there is a challenge of technology adoption, I think they are complete naysayers and they don't know what they're talking about. Think about it this way, 24 million people travel on the Indian Railways daily. 90% of tickets are sold on the Indian Railways online. It's the largest e-commerce portal of this country. And where are these people traveling from? Precisely these locations. So there is no technology challenge. People want to consume content in 3 forms. They want it in voice, so they need a physical touch. They want it in video, they want to understand in short stories, and they want it in vernacular. And vernacular is a very, very critical piece in this country to keep a person hooked and engaged with your brand.
Wow, that railway example was quite an eye opener. I never thought of it from that point of view. Kaushik, again, the category that you are in, again, internet, digital communication would be one of the more important ways of this entire multi-channel marketing approach.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, Karan. I would like to make 3 points on this subject,
Yeah, just be louder.
and particularly on the journey that Ford India has undertaken. So I think point one is what I would term as the KKH principle. The KKH principle. I mean, with all these jargons floating around, I think it's very important. Karna kya hai, right? Absolutely important to have a bang and center the KKH principle. So, for example, in our category, one of the biggest things is and there are enough reports available like the Google Auto Shopper study, which say that consumers research online and increasingly they are visiting fewer showrooms. So the biggest value is really in the discovery phase, is in the phase where consumers is researching for his purchase and stuff like that, right? That's where, for example, the value is, right? So the consumer journey, it's important to figure out the consumer journey, and for every category and every brand, the consumer journey could be different. So that's point number one. Point number two is once you have figured out KKH, it is important to realize that it is an evolution. So point two is evolution and journey. It is going to be an evolution. You have to put the fundamentals in place. For example, at Ford, we put discoverability in place through things like Google My Business, things like one-touch calling to dealerships, ability to attribute talions, stuff like that, right? And then eventually, and you also need to put the culture in place, and it has to be like top down, so that everybody adopts and acknowledges the fact the consumer is changing, and you need to reach him in multiple, through multiple channels and stuff like that, right? So it is an evolution. So while you put the fundamentals in place, then you will evolve to the next stage, potentially put some tools in place. For example, we have tools which enable that across the company and the channel, which enable that. So that's the second piece. And the third piece, and I think the most important piece, is in all this thing of technology and all of that. I think it's important to remember that people like to buy, people hate to be sold. At the end of the day, the human touch is very critical, and especially in a category like ours, it continues to be important. You have to like the person in front of you. I mean, the human touch becomes so very important. So while we have this while we try to reach out the consumer through multiple modes, and the consumer is immersed in multiple environments, while you try to tap him, I think it's important that we also don't lose that. So those are the three key things that we continue working. And so far, for example, we are one of the pioneers as far as using things like programmatic in the industry, and fair to say that a large part of our business today comes from this medium, and we have our agency and partners like Google and Facebook to really who really worked with us.
So let me ask you another related question on this before I come to Angad and Ram. I'm saving the best for the last. Ram, um, the other issue that I wanted to raise right now was the consistency of the message, something that we touched upon even in the opening remarks that I made. Obviously, from your category point of view, almost 85-90% of basic product discovery or researching would happen through the online medium. People want to buy a car, what's the first thing they want to do? They either speak to somebody who already owns that, or they probably go research online and say, Endeavor versus whatever your competition is. If you have a competition, that is. Endeavor doesn't have a competition. Uh, so there is a certain amount of communication that you're doing online from a discoverability point of view. Then there is a certain amount of experience that you're providing to the consumer via the actual product. So you've sold a certain line of thought on the Endeavor online. Somebody comes and now tries the product. And there is a certain amount of experience that you would give through physical interaction at your dealership, at those experience rides that you would create or experience courses that you would create. So how do you ensure that there is a certain thread of consistency on what the brand is promising across these multiple channels of engagement, and that thread is essentially not lost somewhere?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think you made a great point, Karan, and
Endeavor doesn't have competition. That point.
that one is a better one.
Okay.
So, and this is I would characterize it as PowerPoint to store point. A lot can get lost between PowerPoint and store point. So, I mean, at Ford, for example, we understand that the journey is not completed fully online. There is an online and an offline part of the journey. So, the endeavor is to keep the consistency in communication, the brand communication in both parts. So a whole host of efforts goes into training people, goes into designing experiences like the Endeavor drives, which really enable consumers and give them the opportunity to really try the product. Uh, a whole host of efforts goes into training people so that they speak the brand language. Tools provided to dealerships like tabs and stuff so that they're able to demonstrate what the brand stands for. Stuff
So,
like
so
that.
is there an overall custodian within the marketing team who's
Absolutely.
overlooking at these,
I mean,
various spaces?
as marketing, we own the brand, and we are kind of responsible for ensuring the consistency is there. So while there may be a training team, a
Right.
training department, the oversight of looking at the content is ours. So it comes from the brand story. It has to emanate from the brand story.
Great, thanks. I think that's a great segue into what Angad I'd want to touch upon with you, which is this bridge that connects experience communication with actual conversions and sales and revenue. And I know we had an offline chat that you're doing something very interesting on one of the platforms that you're working with. But how do you seamlessly integrate or get it to a point of confluence between experience-led engagement, communication engagement with actual commerce?
So, great question, Karan. Thanks for that. I think so. Just some context. We're a company which is sort of, straddling two avenues of business. It's a media business which is essentially foraying into commerce. So, I've had the opportunity to look at a lot of these existing tech stacks and how they sort of work with each other in sort of our pursuit of creating this holy grail of one centralized view of the customer, right? And coming typically from a media world where most of your advertising revenues are on around the top of the funnel, more engagement led. Looking at our media business from a commerce lens, from an point of transaction lens, is a very interesting opportunity even for us. So we're also learning right now. So I wanted to sort of bring in 2 points before I actually precisely address your question. I think one is that we live in a world of several platforms with their own sort of data mandates and walled gardens. So I think this holy grail of us having one centralized view of the customer, as long as there's reliance on big platforms, those walled gardens are always going to remain. And I don't think I see, especially in this time of hyper data sensitivity and sort of hyper sort of data security sort of in our society right now. We know what's happening with Facebook. We know how GDPR laws in Europe has pulled up. I mean, is almost sort of disrupted the entire Google business, because advertisers can no longer access some of their own the data they wish they would from their Google dashboards. So I think we are living in a sort of a very fragmented data society, and I think as marketeers, you guys must have a very daunting task to have this one centralized view. But I think the contrarian view to that, and I think fine panelists out here address that, is that owning that direct relationship with the customer. And we see that panning out with a lot of these amazing startups in the US, in China, in India as well, who are building these direct to consumer brands, who are bypassing sort of the nuances of platforms and data restrictions of platforms to own the relationship at every touch point. Potentially some who even own the relationship at a logistics and sort of pretty much every single touch point, every single customer journey. I think what we're seeing, largely at least with the business that we are looking at, that the point of engagement and the point of transaction, especially online, are converging, right? So e-commerce platforms today are as much about voyeurism, as much about sort of ogling and getting inspiration, and at the same time, even media products, we create content which creates an environment of impulse purchase. So I think add to that that one, while these two sort of avenues, point of engagement, point of transaction, are converging, we still have a long way to go. I don't see these walled gardens going away anytime soon. I don't see. I only see us getting more hyper sensitive about data privacy laws. So I think having this one centralized view of the customer is going to be a holy grail that we'll, as an industry, will keep working on.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah.
But how do you connect that with conversion? How do you connect this with commerce? This entire
So
palette that you're
essentially,
working on.
I think there's several demand channels out here. I think you mentioned the panel before, the insightful panel before. Somebody mentioned sort of Snap ads and what they're doing around commerce, especially with direct to consumer brands in those 10-second view in, Snapchat stories. Instagram in the US has officially rolled out a product designed for e-commerce company, which takes you from a very visual sort of a photo video led medium directly into a shop environment. If you look at some of the scaled businesses out of China, I think Taotio is a media company which is foraying very aggressively in with its live environment into commerce. There's a app called the Little Red Book. I don't know if the audience out here has heard of it, but Little Red Book today has over 80 million direct DAUs, and the entire premise is content which leads to commerce. I think so. If you look at certain categories of content, like let's say if you leave away news, which is supposedly at the top of the funnel, there is a whole stream of content which is being produced, which has a very natural proclivity to commerce. Right. So wherein essentially the intent of the user is as much to be inspired as much as it is to sort of buy. So I think those lines which you speak of are organically merging. And I think those are the very interesting platforms to look out for even as marketeers. Tomorrow, I think if potentially, the leading car lead supplier in your industry, if they were to start selling the cars and owning that entire experience, how would your relationship with your customer and your data change? And I think those are very interesting experiences which are going to evolve over time. But essentially, from my end, a media company which is foraying into commerce, we believe that we need to be in control at every single touch point. And we also understand at the same time that we will not be able to control and have access to all of the data in a centralized view.
Yeah,
our Facebook data will live in Facebook, our Google data will live in Facebook, and we'll have to figure those things out separately.
I think the walled garden is a very apt way of putting how you put that entire data scenario.
Right.
Ram, one of my favorite themes in this entire conversation on digital, social content, video, and it's a theme that will resonate with everybody here in the room, is this entire business of personalizing content. And how everybody says that content, and the panel before us as well, content needs to be real time, it needs to be created in almost real time that it can be, and it needs to be personalized. You're doing some breakout stuff. So, soon us with what you're doing.
Okay, I'm just going to take a step back first. Okay, I mean, we've heard a lot of things around contextual. We've heard, and these are all very relevant things that are happening on a daily, I mean, in our daily lives, we as marketers or as users of all of these brands that are before us in the digital space, we do what all of you all said. But let's take a step back. I mean, I'm going to give you 2-3 perspectives so that you know what I'm actually going to come at, right? In the 1950s, 85% of Fortune 500 that existed do not exist today. Okay? So a Fortune 500, I mean, any company which is about, let's say, in those days, it was $250 million. So which means that kind of erosion has happened in terms of valuation and stuff like that. Those companies are dead. 10 years hence, I was just telling, just some time back when I was sitting with Kaushik, I was telling him, 10 years hence, jobs that are going to be created are jobs that you and I don't even know what it's going to be. So the only thing that is constant is change, right? Keeping that as perspective, I'm going to give you a 2-minute story of what New York Metropolitan, Museum did. It's something that we discussed, but I want to bring this out so that you all know. As a museum, museums don't recruit chief digital officers, okay? Because, what will a chief digital officer do in a museum? I mean, if any of us, the first thing that we would probably say is, oh, we want to look at all these tourists who are going around and going to, let's say, a Statue of Liberty or going to a Universal studio somewhere downtown, or if somebody is going to, some other place within New York, we want to get all of these guys to come to my museum. Now, that was the first mistake that most of us do. I mean, and while it's matured, I don't think that India is not matured anymore, because we got 650, 700 million internet users who are first-time mobile users as well and consuming data like crazy. Now, given that perspective, what this guy did was he said, my competition is the attention that I need to get from a consumer, right? You get 1 minute. We all keep seeing this slide, right? I mean, I put something up yesterday saying that this is what happens on the internet 1 minute. It's such a joke. I mean, we all know it happens. What the hell is there in it for me? As a brand, what am I going to do? I mean, as a salesperson sitting here, what is it that I'm going to do in that 1 minute for my client is the answer that I need to find out. So let me go back to this story. This guy said the competition that exists is the attention that you need to get, which is 1 minute. And my competition is Netflix. A museum's competition is Netflix, right? A museum, and he's saying that my competition is Candy Crush. Because in the US or wherever, most advanced, even in India now, we all sit in our cars, if you have a chauffeur-driven guy who's sitting behind and you're consuming Netflix, right? So if that is the attention that I need to get, what is it that I need to do? He built an app. He built solid, interesting content that would resonate with that audience. Now, interesting content and video, of course. I mean, all of this is video, right? So he said, I'm going to build 30-second worth of video content, which is going to entice my consumer while he's watching whatever he's watching to say, oh, I want to know what this is about. So he said, I'm from excavation to all the way to cleaning to making sure that this is put up here from the Harappan days or whichever days that museum is got. I'm going to display all of this in that 30 seconds and try and see if I can get the attention of the consumer. You know what happened? Dramatically changed. There was rise in revenue of over 200% that year. In an activity that he did for 3 months. That's it. That app is still up there. You please search, download. Terrific content. Then he said that, why Candy Crush? Because these kids who are coming along with their parents are playing Candy Crush there. So he built an app, within the app he had a game. And then that game resonated to the guys who are playing Candy Crush. The children got hooked. And in that it was educational, so that they also wanted to know how this museum was fit, right? So what I'm saying is, coming back, we are also decided as a company that linear tubing is dead. In all of this, you need to present and empower the consumer, because without customer centricity, any business is a flop. I mean, you might have whatever contextual. I've been in the digital space for 20 years now. A whole bunch of guys who are here know that I've been seeing and hearing this contextual story. Yeah, advertise karo, wall garden. I think all of that is there. It's going to remain. We've been talking this for last 10 years. It's going to remain. I mean, I've got friends from ex-Google who are sitting here, right? I mean, they'll say that they said the same thing 10 years ago. But what are we going to do now is that we are saying that in the video space, let the consumer take control. You're going to see things that you want to see, which means that our product, because I'm representing product, I'm going to come back to my product story. Our product as a SaaS platform enables the consumer to see the content that he or she wants to see in an atmosphere that doesn't exist, which means that multiple people are watching same content but are getting different experiences. right? You are in YouTube, you watch YouTube, YouTube is showing whatever it's showing and you're consuming that. Now we have changed that. We flipped the whole story. We are saying that, okay, you're watching, let's say, whatever app you are watching, whatever content you're watching, you decide within that app, I want to watch, let's say you're watching a movie and Three Idiots. I want to watch only songs of Three Idiots while it is playing. You're sitting next to me watching the start of Three Idiots when they're in the aircraft and going in the bus and all that, the first scene, while I'm consuming something else at the same time. So I am empowering the consumer. The centricity is what our focus is, and that's where the whole differentiation is to an extent that we got 8 patents around, non-linear video delivery. The biggest guys have started talking to us because they can't copy us. If they copy us, we're going to sue them. We let them do what they want. We'll make the money after a year. We'll sue them and get the money out, right? I'm just giving you a lighter side of it. But the reality is that IAB has written to us stating that now you guys are now defining the space. Write it down. Tell us how it needs to be done, how it's got to be executed. We will be with you. Dot zero, I'm done.
Excellent, excellent. So, what does this mean? So we now open it up for questions, yeah? Okay, great. So, opening it up for questions, anybody in the audience would want to ask anything from any one of us? Clearly, we haven't left much to be asked, is it?
Or we spoke crap.
Or you've assumed that this panel is the last word in multi-channel marketing.
Come on, guys, there might be something that you want to know. There are marketers sitting here who you might want to question. Nothing?
Super.
We got one question.
Okay. Yeah.
Kaisa, this is for you. Throw some light on how you convince people that you're selling me a product which I'll never use in my lifetime and it will benefit somebody else.
So this is a very interesting question, and it haunts every life insurer. So what we did, and this is very interesting that you asked, what we realize is that if you really look at the saleable population of life insurance in this country today, your average age is about 25, your median age is about 28 or so. So what we figured is that telling a guy, what's going to happen to you after you die, when, the person's still got 30, 40 years, 50 years to live, your average life expectancy today for a male is 70 and for a female is 68, we completely flip the story around. So today what we do is, we talk about living benefits, which is, what is your goal 3 to 5 years from now? So typically we don't sell life insurance in the classical form. We sell it as a sachet product of 5 years, where we say, what's your goal 5 years from today? Invest now and take that money and go away 5 years from now. So we really don't talk about, your wife in a white sari with a gungat saying that, mere pati ne bahut acha, kaam kiya. We don't talk about that anymore. We talk about living benefits, going on a foreign tour, taking your parents out, starting your own startup, that kind of stuff. So save towards a goal, which is 5 years from now. So it's all about living benefits. We don't talk death benefits anymore.
And at the end of 5 years, you manage to get them to reinvest that or roll it over.
Well, if that's what storytelling is about, right?
Okay, got it. Well done.
Nicely done. Nicely put. Any other question? Anyone?
Could we take it offline because the spotlight session will be begin
Sure,
there.
super. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, all my panelists.
We'll be
Thank you
proceeding
once
ahead
again.
on stage. We just got